our world can be a desolate and draining place. It can steal our hope and leave us running on empty. But then there are those people who live in the same world, yet they're hopeful. They have what seems to be an unshakable confidence in God, in spite of what they've seen, in spite of what they've experienced, in spite of what's happening around them. They don't have amazing beliefs. They have amazing faith. So where does that come from? And how do we get it? How do we rediscover and refuel our faith in a world that's running on empty?
Well, hey, good morning. Happy Mother's Day. How you guys doing? My name is John, and what a great day. Anybody have that breakfast already? Amazing. And we're kicking off a new series, so just so great to have you here. The series is called Faithful. The subtitle is Fueling Your Faith in a World on Empty. And most of us have probably met somebody along the way, or maybe we've heard stories or seen people, but most of us probably have known people at some point who had what seems to be unshakable, robust, life-fueling faith. And you may not have much faith of your own, or you may not really consider yourself much of a religious person at all, or you may have faith, like you were really honest, you may have faith that seems to come and go a bit, that ebbs and flows maybe with circumstances, and sometimes it feels stronger, and at other times in your life, it feels more distant, or maybe even it gets rocked a little bit. But you've seen people, and maybe you've even known people who have this robust, energizing faith, like no matter what happened to them, no matter what happened around them, no matter what happened to their own, they had this confidence in God. They had a trust in who He is and what He's up to and what He might do even in and through the experiences that they were having, that God is good and God is always up to something good, even when things around us are not good. A confidence they had that like steadied them and fueled them in those times. And you may have found that inspiring. You may have found that annoying. But there are these people who around us, and they take Jesus seriously, and they follow Jesus seriously, and they know that there is more to this life than this life. And they experience suffering and pain and loss and struggle in the context of a God who knows them and loves them and is for them and who does at times intervene, absolutely, but more importantly, He will ultimately intervene and restore all things, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And so they aren't just living for this life, because they know there's more to this life, both in this life and beyond this life. They don't just have amazing beliefs. They have amazing faith. It's active, it's gritty, it's tenacious, and it's emotionally and relationally fueling and refueling to them. It guides and informs their decisions and their reactions, their course of life, and consequently, they're resilient. They're these resilient people while the rest of us are looking at them going, like, how are you still standing right now, right? So here's the question. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Is it genetic? Because it's different, isn't it, than just positivity or optimism, though those are wonderful things too. Where does that come from? And how do we get that? How do we get it, or how do we get more of it? And that's what this next 4-week series is all about. And so if you've lost faith or you feel like you're losing faith, this series is for you. In fact, it may explain kind of what happened to you. If you're looking for faith, or maybe rediscovering or moving back towards faith, this series is for you. And if you would consider yourself a person of faith, but you want to become that kind of person with that inspiring, resilient, life-fueling, deep faith, this series is definitely for you. Now, here's something I've always found interesting. There are actually only two times in all of the Jesus stories, all of the biographies about Jesus, where Jesus is described as being amazed. Like 2 times when Jesus was like, whoa, did everybody just see that? Did everyone see which is kind of cool to think about, like Jesus reacting that way. What makes Jesus go, whoa? Like what takes him like by surprise? Because Jesus was amazing and people are often amazed by him, but on two occasions, Jesus is described as being amazed. And the first time is this powerful story. It's found in Matthew's biography of Jesus. And Matthew was an eyewitness follower of Jesus, but he was a very unlikely follower of Jesus because Matthew, before he met and followed Jesus, he was in a category of people that was below sinner. So they were like all the good religious people, and then there was most people that the good religious people considered to be sinners, but like that's changed, so that's good. There were the good people and there were the sinners, and then there were people that the sinners didn't even want to be around because they were the bottom of the barrel, and that was Matthew. He was that guy. He was a tax collector for the Roman Empire, and Jesus befriended him, liked Matthew, befriended him, and eventually invited Matthew to follow him, and Matthew did. And Matthew followed Jesus. He was an eyewitness to his life, his teachings, his death, and his resurrection, and eventually, years later, he wrote a biography of Jesus' life that became like a bestseller. In fact, Matthew's biography of Jesus' life was the most popular biography of Jesus for the early followers of Jesus, and it's known as the Good News according to Matthew. And he tells this story. And he must have kind of loved this story because Matthew was an unlikely person, and this story is about an unlikely person as well, a surprising person, a centurion, a Roman centurion. In other words, a Roman army officer, a commander of 100 people, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. And you got to understand when you read the story, the Roman army, they were an occupying army. They were the enemy. They were invaders. If this was 1940s Poland, this would be a Nazi officer. If it was Boston 1775, it would be a red coat. These are the people, they marched into our country. They take whatever they want. They demand taxes from us. They force us to feed their armies. Sometimes they walk up to a group of people and say, you come with me, and you may never see those people again. A Roman army, and Matthew says one day they were in Capernaum, which is where Matthew's from. In fact, given what Matthew did for a living, it's very likely he knew this person personally. One day, a centurion stops Jesus on the street, which is not normally a good thing. And he asks Jesus for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. To which Jesus' disciples were probably thinking, well, good. In fact, I hope you catch what he got. I hope you pass it on to all your 100 guys and you take it back to Rome with you. Come on, Jesus, let's go help some of our own people, right? And Jesus replies in this surprising way. Jesus looks at him and he says, you want me to come home with you and heal him? You want me to come with you and heal him? And the disciples, they're like, well, Jesus, we can't go into his house. Like, you can't go into his house. His house is unclean. He's got Roman cooties. Like, there are shrines and gods and incense probably burning to all kinds of things and unclean foods. It is a sinful place to be. I mean, Jesus, it was bad enough going to Matthew's house. No offense, Matthew. It was bad enough when we went there. You can't go to a Roman army officer's house. Now, the centurion himself understood this whole dynamic, that he knew the good Torah-observant Jewish people did not go into the homes of pagan, non-Jewish, especially Roman people. And the centurion replied, Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That's something to say. Lord, I don't deserve to have. And the disciples are like, well, that's true. Finally, a voice of reason. Yeah, you don't deserve. Jesus, let's go. But then he says, but you just say the word. I don't deserve to have you come under my roof, but you say the word, and my servant will be healed. I'm confident that he will be healed. Now, that is a very remarkable thing for him to say, because the idea of long-distance healing or long-distance magic or long-distance power was not a thing in the ancient world. All cultures in the ancient world had their ideas of how healing or sorcery or magic or witchcraft or how all of those things worked, and it was always in person. The healer had to be there in person and do their things. But he goes, I don't think you need to do that. You just say the word. And then he gives his explanation. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. In other words, here's what he's saying. Jesus, I've been watching you. I've been watching you, and I've seen what you do, and I've been connecting the dots. And here's what I understand. I understand authority. I understand authority and how authority works. And so I command like 100 or so men and my servants, and listen, when I say the word, when I say you go down that street and guard that building or surround that crowd and make sure nothing happens or march to the next city, when I say the word, they do it just like that. And it's not because of me. It's not because of me, it's because who I'm under, who I represent, the Roman Empire. And I've been watching you. I've been watching you, Jesus, and you command illness. You command disease and disability and death and the daemons, the spirits, the powers. You speak to things and those things obey you. And I've never seen anyone command illness or death or the spirits or the demons before. Like, I've never seen anyone do what you do. And here's what I understand. You have authority. You have authority because of who you represent, that you are under God's authority. And therefore, things that are only under God's authority are under your authority. And that authority, it is not limited by physical proximity. It transcends location. And that's why I know you don't have to come to my house. You don't have to come with me all the way back to my house. You just say the word. You just say the word, and I know my servant will be healed. And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. He was shocked. He was amazed. Amazed by what? Not by the request, not by the audacity of the request. The disciples were probably amazed by the audacity, like, how dare you? Jesus wasn't amazed by the request or even the man's humility. He was amazed by something else, and he looks around at the crowd. And this is a bit of a dig at this point. He looks around at the people who are gathered there, and he says, truly, I tell you, I haven't found anyone in Israel. In other words, I haven't found anyone among the people who are supposed to be connecting the dots and picking up what I'm putting down. I haven't found anyone in Israel with such great, faith. With such great faith. And then Jesus said to the centurion, go, let it be done just as you believed it would. And his servant, and I believe Matthew knows this story firsthand. He probably knows this person. He probably knows the servant. And the servant was healed. And when they kind of went back in their minds to figure out when he was healed, it was like, that was the very moment that he got out of bed and he was fine. So you know what blew Jesus' mind? It was faith. It was big faith. Like, here's a guy, think about this. Here's a guy who worships Zeus. He worships Apollo. He worships Fortuna and Mithra, as all of the Roman legions did. He worships the goddess Roma, who represents the empire, and he worships Caesar himself. Every single day, as a Roman centurion, he would burn incense to Caesar and say prayers to Caesar. He doesn't know the 10 Commandments. He's never been to the temple. He's probably never read Torah. In other words, he doesn't have all the right content, but he has great confidence. He has incredible confidence in Jesus and in the God whom Jesus so clearly to him represents. He connects the dots and then he acts on it. And he made Jesus say, whoa, that is amazing faith. Now, fun fact. In contrast to maybe your experience of religion or maybe your experience of religious people, Jesus never marveled at, Jesus was never amazed at anyone's knowledge or their discipline. Jesus never amazed by someone's knowledge. You are just so smart. You know so much of the Bible. You can quote it left and right. That was such a clever insight. Let me write that down. That was amazing. He was never amazed by people's knowledge or even their discipline. Like, you were just so disciplined. You wake up so early in the morning and you do those, you were so good at obeying the rules. You have incredible willpower. He was never amazed by anyone's knowledge or discipline. What he was amazed by in this moment was faith. Real life, authentic, gutsy, absolute confidence in him and in the God he represented. Now, the other time Jesus was amazed is just the opposite of that. An opposite story. It's found in Mark's biography, and Mark tells us that Jesus went to his hometown, which is Nazareth. Now, Nazareth, that's where Jesus grew up. That's where his family had lived, and a lot of his family still lived. And Nazareth, we know from archaeology, was a small village. It was what we would call podunk. I mean, everybody knows everybody. There's just a few people who live there. It's a very small town. And he goes back home, followed by his disciples, and then Sabbath, Shabbat comes, and he began to teach teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were amazed. So initially they're like, wow, this guy's good. Like, wow, he's really interesting. He's got some really good stuff. But then they start to say, well, wait a minute. This is Jesus. We remember little Jesus. He's nothing special. Where did this man get all these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that he's been given? What are these remarkable miracles he's performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Hey, Joe, didn't Jesus build that table you got in your dining room? Yeah, like it's a pretty good table. It's been awesome. Like, didn't he, like, isn't he the carpenter? Isn't he? And this is a bit of a slur. Isn't this Mary's son? Now, normally a Jewish boy would be referred to as his daddy's son, but Jesus's parentage was, well, a little questionable. Not Joseph's son. Isn't this Mary's son? By the way, we remember those stories about his questionable parentage and his brothers, Joseph and Judas and James and Simon. Aren't his sisters, don't they all still live here? And they took offense at him. They took offense at him that someone of such common, dare we say, questionable origins would be trying to maybe be something they're not, exceeding their station, and they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his own town, among his relatives, in his own home. The irony of that familiarity does at times breed contempt. And then, Mark tells us, he could not do any miracles there. Well, except lay his hands on a few people and heal them. But like he didn't really do anything. Could not do miracles there. What? Well, why is that? And I would suggest to you, it is not because of anything to do with Jesus or his power or ability or desire to do so. It was because of them, that they weren't willing to come to him. They weren't willing to come to him with that same humble confidence and trust that a Roman centurion had. They failed to connect the dots. And Mark tells us, and he was amazed. He was amazed at their lack of faith, the absence of it. Like, so what makes Jesus go, whoa? And the answer is faith. Like a person's trust or confidence in who God is, either great faith, where maybe it was unexpected, uncharacteristic, insightful faith, or the absence of faith when it really should be there. Which raises a question. What is faith? What is faith? And here's where it gets a little confusing, especially because of the way people often talk about faith or think about faith, even religious people, maybe especially religious people, as if faith were some kind of like counterfactual thinking or counter-evidentiary thinking. As Mark Twain once said, faith is believing what you know ain't true. Richard Dawkins defined faith as belief in spite of evidence, called it one of the most dangerous things on the planet, that is somehow counterfactual or counter-evidentiary thinking. And this might be one of the reasons, quite honestly, why you struggle with faith sometimes. Or you maybe even stepped away from faith, because the assumption often is that following Jesus requires brain-shelving, experience-denying faith. And faith itself actually becomes part of the problem, that following Jesus, or even seriously considering following Jesus, requires some kind of brain-shelving, like don't think about that, don't ask those questions. You just have to believe, you can't know. That's what faith is. What? Yeah, you can't know, so you just believe things. You have to, and experience denying, like I just have to pretend that didn't ever happen to me. I have to pretend that those things don't happen in the world. That following Jesus requires brain-shelving, experience-denying faith. And if you've ever struggled with that, here's what I want you to know, and maybe what nobody has ever told you before. The original version did not. The original version of faith did not require brain-shelving, experience-denying faith. Jesus' original followers, they did not pretend that things were better than they were. Ever. They didn't put their brains on a shelf. They didn't close their eyes and stop asking all those pesky questions. In fact, Jesus never invited people to follow him or trust him in spite of evidence. It was always the opposite. He always was bringing people back to the evidence, back to what they have seen and heard, and helping them connect the dots. And the Jesus movement did not explode onto the scene and take off because of something that people believed in spite of evidence and in spite of experience. Again, it was exactly the opposite of that. The Jesus movement exploded onto the scene because of an event that happened, that we celebrate on Easter, an undeniable and, by the way, historically verifiable experience that they witnessed. And once they saw it, they could never unsee it, that launched the movement that changed the world. And the first followers of Jesus, when they talked about faith, it was very different than the way religious people often, even religious leaders, even people who do what I do, very different than the way religious people often talk about faith today. For them, faith was not a fiction to be believed in spite of evidence. Like, well, how do you know? Well, you can't know. That's what faith is. Faith is what you believe when you can't know it. What? Yeah, it's just this counterfactual thinking that for them, faith was not a fiction. Rather, it was an orientation of your life that you have because of evidence. Faith was not a fiction. Faith is not a force. Faith is not a force to be harnessed or tapped into. Faith was for them, it was not a force that moved or convinced God or the universe or the gods or the spirits to do something that the universe or God would not have otherwise done. And the idea is kind of like, if enough people believe, and if you just believe and you believe the right way and hard enough and pure enough and true enough, and if you truly, truly believe, then God will do what we want him to do that he wouldn't otherwise do. And maybe that's the reason why at some point you've wandered from faith, or you've wondered about faith because your loved one got sick and you had faith and you prayed and you prayed and you prayed, and the pastor of your church came over or came to the hospital, and church people came over and they prayed and they prayed and they declared their faith and they spoke to the disease and they demanded it to be gone and declared that it was gone, and they told you that if you had enough faith and if that you truly believed, it would be true. And your loved one didn't get better. And you began to wonder, is there anything to this at all? Is any of that even true? Faith for them was not some force that they could harness, nor was it a formula to be deciphered, this magic formula, and if you could just figure it out, because this guy getting the PIN code, if you get the PIN code and figure it out, God will start spitting out 20s. Like, it's a vending machine, kind of like if you say the prayer the right way, and you use the right words and the right intonations, the right combination of things, like magic, you can, if you have the formula, God will do what you want him to do. For the early followers of Jesus, faith had nothing to do with any of that. So what is faith? What is faith? Well, there's a document in what we call the New Testament. The documents in the New Testament, the writings of the first followers of Jesus. The document is known as the Letter to the Hebrews, and it was written to Jewish background followers of Jesus in Rome in the mid-60s AD. And this group of people, these Jewish background followers of Jesus, they had been through it. They had been through a series of life-altering, terrible, terrible events. In 49 AD, Claudius, the emperor at the time, had expelled all Jewish people from the city of Rome, kicked out all Jewish people from the city of Rome because of some riots that were taking place, and many of them lost everything in that process. They lost their possessions, they lost land, they lost businesses. And then in the mid-50s, they were allowed to return to Rome, and many of them did. But in 64 AD, a terrible fire swept through the city of Rome, destroying 2/3 of the city. And Nero, the emperor at that time, blamed the fire on Christians. And they were now being rounded up and killed in terrible, terrible ways en masse. And some had fled the city, and many had fled to the catacombs. And some, like this community, some were ready to throw in the towel, ready to recant, if you will. And it's clear from reading this letter that that's what they're struggling with. And the author, who's anonymous, by the way, though there are some really interesting theories on who might have written this letter, the author writes this brilliant, brilliant sermon letter, and he's challenging their faith. He's challenging their experience. He's challenging their sense of the story, and he's challenging them to remain faithful. And towards the end of the letter, after all of these challenges, he finally gives a definition, if you will, or really like a description of what faith is, followed by a series of case studies to like unpack his description of faith, like what it is and what it isn't. And so here's what he says, Hebrews 11. Now faith is, and they're wondering about faith, Like maybe you wonder about faith. In fact, some of them are wandering from faith, and he's been challenging them this whole letter long regarding their faithfulness to God and God's faithfulness to them. And now he's going to unpack what that means. He's going to describe what faith is. He says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for. Now, there's another word, hope. So like, what's hope? Well, hope is expecting something to be so before it actually is so, right? Hope is expecting something to be so before it is so. Gee, I hope I get that raise. I hope I get that raise. I hope I get married someday. Heck, I hope I get a date. I hope. And hope, we all know this, hope can range from delusional thinking, right, to reasonable optimism. Like that's a reasonable hope. And faith is confidence in what we hope for. Confidence. Now, here he uses this word taken from Greek philosophy that the writer of Hebrews shows that he's very adept with, the word is hypostasis, and is a very common word in Greek philosophy. In fact, if you studied Greek philosophy, you know this idea of the substance or the reality of a thing. The true substance or the true reality of the thing as opposed to what it appears to be or seems to be. This is the reality of it, and so it is then by extension, assurance or having confidence in something that is yet unseen will be. Confidence in what we hope for. Faith is what happens. Faith is what happens, he says, when hope so, I hope so, becomes confident that something actually will be so, which raises a question. What makes us confident that hope so will be so? What makes us confident that hope so will be? What has to happen, think about this in your own life, for you to move from, I hope so, to, I am absolutely confident that is going to be so before it actually is so? It's an interesting question. But he just continues. He gives the same definition or description a second way in a slightly different phrase. And it's the confidence in what we hope for, and it's assurance about what we do not see. Like there are things that will happen in the future that we have not seen yet, and we have assurance. That's what faith is, assurance. And again, he uses this very common word from Greek philosophy, elenkos, which is the proof or the evidence of a thing, and consequently, certainty that I might have because of the proof or the evidence of a thing. So once again, like what has to happen in your life for hope so to become assurance, for I haven't seen it yet to be I'm confident. I'm absolutely confident I will see it. In fact, I'm going to begin to orientate my life around that actually happening. What has to happen? The answer is so simple and so obvious, he doesn't even say it because we all know it. So here's the question. When are you confident? When do you have confidence that you're going to get the job? You're applying for the job, like I hope I get that job. I think I did pretty well in the interview. I think I got a good chance. They seem to be talking to me like I'm gonna get the job. When are you confident that you got the job? And the answer is, when you get the email, when the interviewer reaches across the desk and says, congratulations, you have the job. When you get the offer letter and you signed it. And when that happens, you go home or you text your parents or you call your buddy and you don't say, hey, great news, I hope I got the job. You don't say that. Will you say what? I got the job. Hey, I got the job. How do you know? How do you know? Did you start work yet? No. Have you got a paycheck? No. How do you know you got the job? Well, they said so. She said so. I have assurance. Or, you hope she'll go out with you. You asked her out. You hope she'll go out with you. And then you get that text, 7:30 sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. And you show it to your friend. Like, hey, she said yes. And hope so. In that moment becomes confidence that it will be so. Or you invite a bunch of your friends over for brunch or for dinner or for like Friday night. When do you have the confidence or the proof, if you will, to go out shopping for groceries and shopping for supplies? And the answer is, well, when they reply back and they say they're coming Friday night, sounds great. What can I bring? And this is key. If my history with you is such that I think you keep your word. In other words, if you're not a flake, and nobody here is one, nobody here's a flake, you signed up for Kids Feeding Kids and you are going to be there because you're not a flake, right? In fact, turn to the person sitting next to you and say, I'm no flake. I'm not a flake. Go ahead, turn them and say, yeah, I'm not a flake. I'm not a flake. And if you're not a flake, and I know you're not a flake, if it is reasonable, that's a key word for me to think that what I haven't seen yet will actually be, then what do? I act as if it will be. I act upon that assurance. I go shopping. I get some groceries. I start to cook. I buy a suit for my first day at work. I clean my car and get in it, go pick her up. I act upon my confidence that what is not yet will be. And
the writer of Hebrews says, that's what faith is. That thing right there. That faith is confidence. Faith is confidence in who God is and what he says he will do. Not confidence in what I say God will do. I'm not signing God's name to checks he didn't write. I'm confident in what he says that God is and in who God truly is, and that he will do what he says he will do because he is faithful, and therefore I am faithful. And this is really important. We do not believe in God because of faith. We don't believe in God because of faith or because of blind faith. I believe that God is because of evidence, because of reasons upon reasons upon reasons. And we do not believe that God keeps his promises because of some kind of blind faith. We believe that God keeps his promises because God has shown up. God has shown up again and again throughout history, and many of us would say, and he has shown up in our lives, and he has shown up in the lives of people we know, and therefore we trust him. Faith is like that centurion, connecting the dots between the evidence that we have actually seen and my confidence in who God is and what he will do. But, very important, faith isn't just a feeling of confidence, it is vitally more than that. Faith is acting upon my confidence in who God is and what he says will do. Faith is acting upon. I go shopping. I start to cook the meal. I buy the suit. If I have faith, I don't wait till you show up at my door on Friday and go, hey, you came. Hey, I got to hit the grocery store real quick. I'll be back in a half hour. Y'all talk amongst yourselves. I have already acted in faith and confidence upon what I believe will happen. I begin to orient my life and my choices. That's what I do. And we live with this we do this every single day. I begin to orient my life and my choices based on that confidence in that direction. And this is the hypostasis. That right there, that's the thing that gives it substance, that makes it the reality. Faith is a state of mind and a state of being that ties a reasonable person to an expected outcome. I go shopping because it is reasonable for me to think that you're coming. I have tied my moment today with an expected outcome so that I then behave positively in light of that which is not yet come to be. Which is where the author of Hebrews goes next. He goes, now this right here, this kind of faith that we're talking about, this kind of confidence, this kind of acting upon and acting as if what is anticipated really will be, this is what the ancients were commended for. This is what they were praised for. And then he gives case study after case study, example after example from their history, names and stories that they grew up hearing, people whose stories they knew so well, men and women who risked great things, acting as if something would be before it actually came to be. Each of them, he will say again and again, by faith, they did something. They did something. They acted. Faith acts. Faith works. Faith does. That's what faith is. They did something. They oriented their lives towards that outcome. And in case after case, it is what they did that made the difference. It was the hypostasis. It is what they did that made the difference. Not feelings, not blind beliefs, not a fiction, not a force, not a formula. They had confidence in who God is and in what God said he would do. And again and again and again, they acted as if he actually would. They acted in this moment as if he actually would, acted upon that confidence, orienting their lives in the direction of that expectation. And they faced incredible challenges. And they experienced and endured horrible opposition and suffering because this is a fallen world. And they overcame insurmountable obstacles, often imperfectly, by the way. Their beliefs and their character, seriously, were sometimes very much in question. But in the end, when the dust settled, they acted. They acted because they trusted. They acted upon what they believed God is and what he said he would do. They didn't just have amazing beliefs. They had amazing faith. So, how do we get that? How do we get that? How do people like us build deeper, more resilient, life-fueling faith? How do we get ourselves moving in that direction? And that's the question that we're going to answer beginning next week and over the next 3 weeks as we look at 3 case studies that the writer of Hebrews gives. Incredible stories, and 3 practices that we believe are the most vital. Like if I could think of 3 things that are most vital to becoming truly faithful people, 3 things that grow deep, resilient, life-fueling faith. But before we close, I have one more question for you. Have you ever confused faith? Have you ever confused faith with the content of a few of your beliefs rather than absolute confidence in who God is and what he says he will do? That God is with you and loves you and knows you and is for you, and therefore you are acting upon that confidence and building your life in that direction because you trust him. Have you ever confused faith with the content of a few of your beliefs rather than the absolute confidence that you have that God is with you and for you? And maybe to make it a little more specific and to get in your business a little bit, is there any area of your life where you are not currently acting upon? You are not currently acting upon something you know God wants you to do. Something that he's already, like you already have this sense that what you're doing, this is the direction you're going, and you know he wants you to go in that direction. Is there any area of your life where you're currently not acting upon something you're pretty sure God wants you to do? And if you were honest, it's because you don't really trust him. You don't really trust him. You're just not so sure that his path for your life, that what he's calling you to do actually would be your best possible life. And if so, here's the question. Like, what would it look like for you to truly trust God? What would that look like to have absolute confidence that he's right, that he's always right because he's super smart, and that he loves you and he really knows you. He gets you, he sees you, and that his path for your life is your best possible life? To act upon that right there, regardless of the risk, what would it look like for you to truly trust God? And this week, I want to invite you to actually have that out with God. Have a wrestling match with him. I hope you lose it. Have a fight with God about this area of your life where you kind of know what he wants you to do and you are not sure that it will be best for your life. This week, I invite you to have that conversation with him, and I dare you to truly trust him and to begin moving your life in the direction that you think he might be calling you to do. And whether you're struggling with faith, or wandering from faith, or regaining faith and wandering back to faith, or just wanting to grow your faith, I hope you'll join us next weekend as we pick it up right there for part 2 of Faithful, Fueling Your Faith in a World on Empty. Let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, as I always think about these things, my prayer is that you would give each one of us ears to hear what we needed to hear. We are just all in such different places, struggling with different things at different places along our spiritual journey, along our faith journey, different things that we needed to hear today. And I just pray that you give each one of us the ears to hear what we needed to hear, the wisdom to pull it into ourselves, the grace we need as we struggle and wrestle with it. And I pray for myself, especially, and maybe for a handful of people who know you're calling us in a certain direction and you know you're tugging us in a certain way, that we would just so fully trust who you are, that you are good, you are always up to something good, and you are always up to something good with us and in us and through us, and we would just be saying yes, yes, yes to you. I pray that for myself. I pray that for all of us in Jesus' name. Amen.